We'd like to start off with, was there any books, particularly in your early career or in politics, that were quite influential in how you ran things?
Books. Not really. Not a sort of like a management book or anything like that. I guess a book that was quite influential was Anti-fragile. Nassim Taleb, isn't it? That's right. Yeah.
Jonesy's ears pricked up. That's one of his favourites.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those books that kind of confirmed something I'd already thought, and provided a sort of intellectual hinterland for something that was quite intuitive. That was and this is the whole point that I used to make a lot, which is that we, because we live in a time of unprecedented change, both in scale and pace, and so the tenor of the time is volatility, and there's nothing you can do to change that. That's the environment. So what you've got to do is make sure that your government, your country, your company is as resilient and agile as possible. And that term anti-fragile was very helpful, because it basically says, well, you want to be in a position where, like a muscle, change makes you stronger, as opposed to being like a piece of porcelain that any sort of disruption will cause you to break.
It's funny you say that, Malcolm, because when reading your book, I really got the feeling of Anti-fragile with how you did your career. So I remember from the book, it talks about a Greek mythological character called Hydra, and it lurked deep in the waters, and it had multiple heads. And when you cut off one of its heads, it grows two back. So over time, it's happy to get its head cut off and start afresh and start something new. And over time, you get more and more heads. And if I look at your career, for example, you started in journalism, and then after that, you moved into finish your law degree, and then you were very successful in law. And then from that, you kind of put law aside, and then you went into investment banking, and same in politics. So I get that feeling of Anti-fragile, like Hydra, getting more and more heads as your career kind of progressed.
Yeah. Well, I guess so. I mean, I've had a series of different careers. I like to do different things. I mean, I like different challenges. I'm naturally inquisitive. I think, if I were to say what is, I'm really hopeless at self-analysis, by the way, which makes me completely, this is why I would never fit in as a millennial. But I'm not as introspective as I probably should be. But anyway, I would say this: I'm very curious. I've always wanted to learn something new, and that is a great help, I think. I think curiosity is a really valuable thing, and you want to encourage that. So, all my life, whenever I've sat down with people, I've always, taken lots of notes. My iPad was a constant companion with me when I was in politics. Really to sit down. If I had a room of experts, as I often did, because one of the great things about being in Parliament is really smart people want to talk to you and tell you things. And, I take a lot of notes, and so I love learning about new things. So that's important, because a lot of people aren't like that, which is a big mistake.
Yeah, curiosity is an absolutely vital thing, and it seems like a lot of successful people always cultivate that curiosity.
Yeah. It's also important, Adam, if I could just add to this, from a sort of societal point of view, social point of view, and social cohesion point of view, and something I've always encouraged is cultural curiosity. So, we live in a country where the people, our friends and neighbours, classmates, whatever, workmates, are very likely from a different background to us. They might be an Indigenous person, they might be, you know, their family might be from Greece or China or India or whatever. And it's, you know, I've always been very interested and curious about different cultures, religions, backgrounds, family stories. And, you know, that's something I found very, very helpful and rewarding. I mean, I used to, you know, I still do, but I always have got a lot of public transport. And it's amazing, you know, if you're on a, you know, it's got to be a trip of more than 5 minutes, I suppose, but you know, it's amazing sometimes to sit down to people and they'll just literally tell you the story of their life. I mean, I remember getting a bus at, you know, up in, you know, up sort of just up the hill from Watson's Bay back to Edgecliff where my office was. So I don't know, maybe it's a 25-minute bus ride. And I was sitting next to an old guy and he literally gave me the story of his life in 25 minutes, which you could have turned into a movie. You know, it was just staggering. So, yeah.
I love that curiosity. So you've got both the curiosity for learning new things, but then also the curiosity for people and different cultures. What other skills or attributes do you think were vital in your career? Or if it's easier, if you don't want to talk yourself up too much, what advice would you give to other people in terms of things that they should do earlier?
Well, look, I don't know. I mean, you know, everyone's got to chart their own course. I think clearly determination is vitally important. I've never taken anything for granted. I've never had a sense of entitlement. You know, Paddy Manning wrote a book about me called Born to Rule, which I mean, a catchy title, I suppose. But, you know, it was, I mean, he wrote it out of the clips. It wasn't particularly insightful, I don't think, because he didn't know me. But the title, Born to Rule, I mean, that is literally the reverse of how I've never regarded myself as entitled to anything. And so that's quite a good place to start. So you've got to start and say, right, well, I want to do X. So what do I have to do to get to X? You know, I can't assume. We just lost you for a second then, by the way. We can't assume that you know, it's going to fall into my lap.
That's right. And it's kind of like that. If it's meant to be, it's up for me. And there's quite a few times in your book where you made a cold call and invented an opportunity out of nothing, which we really loved. One of the things I want to ask you is, how's the reception for the book been given by the different, say, media agencies and different who they're owned by, and the differences in opinion of how the book's been? Well,
I think it's been, the book's selling well. So the publishers are very happy. It's been the #1 bestseller for 2 weeks, which is, it's only been on sale for two and a bit weeks. So that's good. Well, I mean, my predictable critics have been predictably critical. You know, so the News Corp outlets, first they, you know, got a pirated copy of the book and tried and broke the copyright and, you know, published great slabs of it before anyone else. They bagged it unmercifully, all of which I think has helped sales.
I think that's a good thing.
And, you know, but this is the sort of professional Turnbull hating brigade. In terms of the rest of the media, I mean, I think, I don't know, the reviews have been, I think, on balance positive, but I mean, everyone's got a view. Some people object to some bits in the book, but, you know, it's a big book. It's a big, you know, it's a big book. There's a lot in it, a lot of people in it, a lot of events, and inevitably they'll be contentious, right? So
100%. It reminds a little bit of the Spycatcher trial and the negative publicity, right? There's no negative of buying a book, so publicity can only do a good thing for a book.
Oh, yeah, well, the Spycatcher trial is, I mean, as you know, if Peter Wright's memoir, Spycatcher, which was basically a load of old cobblers because it had all been published before, if Peter's memoir had just been published without any objection, it would have done well to sell 50,000 copies, which is still a lot of books, but, is not, huge. It sold millions. It sold, I can't remember now, like 3.5 million copies, entirely because the British government tried to ban it. I mean, I had a friend, ex-CIA agent, actually, around that time, who I'd got to know, and he used to write a bit. A guy called Miles Copeland. When I say he's a friend, he was an acquaintance. Probably a better way to describe it. And he just said, "Oh, I wish someone would try to ban my books."
I think it's called the Streisand effect, where Barbara Streisand, her address was public and she tried to have it blocked so that no one knew where she lived. But because she was trying so hard to get it blocked, all of a sudden everyone wanted to know where she lived. So there's like helicopters flying over and filming her. So the more she tried to block it, the more people actually want to know it. So it's similar.
Yeah, well, that's right. The minute you tell people they can't have something, they want it. No.
It's absolutely the opposite of, I'd say, some of the Murdoch-owned media, and it was quite interesting hearing about I feel like in the book it wasn't explicitly mentioned how the money flows from the fossil fuel lobby through to the Murdoch media and then somehow influences politics. But when I was reading,
I'm not sure. I don't think it's all about money, to be honest, Adam. I think that the question, so this is the question. Why has the populist right of politics, and, with its Tribune, its amplifier, its, biggest sort of endorser, the Murdoch Media, both here and in the US, why have they adopted climate denialism as a values issue? Recognizing that global warming is just a function of physics. The greenhouse effect is well understood. The climate models that might have been seen to be speculative 20 years ago have all been proved to be right, and in some respects conservative. So, why do we still get this denial of science? And the easy explanation would be that truckloads of gold are being deposited in, Mr. Murdoch's bank account by the coal and gas and fossil fuels lobby. I don't think that's the case. I think it's a cultural thing, it's become a values and identity issue, and I struggle to understand why. Because I could understand it when, up to a point, when the cost of going green was quite high. And people would say, yeah, okay, I get that, this is bad for the planet, but you know what, I don't want to pay more for my electricity. At least that's at least comprehensible, if not rational. But now, where it is obvious that renewables plus storage firming, is cheaper than burning coal, there's no question at all that we can have lower emissions and lower energy prices. We still get the same opposition. And, you get that like truly wickedly unhinged approach that they had during the bushfires. I mean, that whole campaign in the Murdoch media to try to attribute the cause of the bushfires to arson, saying, oh, it's not climate change, not global warming, there's just some bad people lighting fires. And even after the head of the Rural Fire Service went out and said this is wrong, they kept at it. And so you had this lunacy of having on one page of one of the Murdoch papers, these apocalyptic images of fires and, people huddling on beaches and so forth. And on the other side, there'd be, denunciations of Greta Thunberg and, people, like Andrew Bolt wanting to suggest that she was, mentally unbalanced and so forth. I mean, horrible personal stuff. I mean, it's very, very hard to understand what they're on about. It's I can understand same-sex marriage being a values issue. I can understand the monarchy v. republic thing being a values issue. But why is global warming a values issue? Why don't we say we're going to believe or disbelieve in gravity? I guess the thing is the disbelievers would be encouraged to jump off a high place and see how it worked.
I like it. I'm sure there's more stuff we'll ask around that as well. One question I was keen to ask. I watched the movie Bombshell and the TV series The Loudest Voice, which was all about Fox News and Rupert Murdoch setting that up, and how much that influenced and controlled US politics. And then about 6 months ago, we spoke with Kevin Rudd on the podcast as well, and he talked about how the Murdoch Media was out to get him. And then a lot throughout your book, you made references to the Murdoch Media. Is it true that one guy or one family has so much control over the politics and the government of two of the world's biggest countries?
Well, they have enormous influence. The influence of the right-wing media, which is almost entirely belongs to Murdoch in Australia, is not as strong as it used to be in terms of the electorate at large, because mainstream media's share of attention has diminished, because of podcasts like this and social media and so many other competitors. But its influence over the LNP, over the coalition, Liberal and National parties, and their members is greater than ever. So this is part of the problem. And this is part of the problem of the sort of siloing of media, so that you get people who, but people, I mean, potentially everyone, is in a position to choose their news silo and choose their own facts. So instead of everyone watching the same media, which are appealing to a broad audience and are trying to, more or less, or get the facts straight and, present the news and events as it happens, you get this very, very partisan, approach. And that has resulted in politicians basically doing the same thing, just telling lies, just making, as in Julia Gillard's words, making shit up. And therein lies the problem. So if you want to believe that, if people want to believe that the three of us are members of the Illuminati as part of a intergalactic Masonic conspiracy in league with
lizards
Vatican
in their always
overthrow Western democracy, there will be a Facebook page, a YouTube channel. There will be a couple of websites, all of which are devoted to proving that. And probably from the minute you broadcast this podcast,
few new pages will pop up.
Will be exposed. Be exposed.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, to be frank, that whole thing, it just pisses me off so much and gets my blood boiling a bit. But there's the old saying, seek first to understand and be understood. And if we were to somehow compromise with this right and get both sides listening to each other, to logic, it probably means we need to listen to them and probably look at the values they've got maybe and think, all right, like, what are you doing right? And then, but you're in the best position to probably understand what do they get right, this far reactionary right that we can be listening to.
Well, I think you've got here's another quandary, right? So Donald Trump is a billionaire, arch capitalist, I guess, leading the Republican Party, the party of business. He is in favor of, lower corporate taxes. He is skeptical about welfare. He has a sort of in many respects, a conventional pro-business, centre-right agenda. I mean, and lower taxes are certainly something I've tried to achieve too. So, however, what is interesting is that he was able to mobilise the support of white working class voters whose jobs had either been lost or were threatened in Rust Belt states and were threatened by globalisation, and as they saw it, right? Mm. And so these are people who historically have voted for the Democratic Party. They're members of trade unions. They're working class voters, and they voted for Trump. Anyone less likely to advance their interests, you'd be hard to find, you would think. Mm. And his many of his policies were actually shared by the populist right, which he represented, shared policies with the populist left, i.e. protectionism. Bernie Sanders didn't want to go ahead with the Trans-Pacific Partnership and was down with, free trade agreements, as indeed was Trump. So the curious thing is where is the left going wrong in not being able to, appeal to, find solutions for people who, working class people who feel they are on the, wrong end of the whole, of the modern world, globalization, technological change, and so forth. So I think the answer is I don't think the policies of the populist right are very attractive, at all, but quite the contrary. But I think what you've got to do is be able to mount a case to people in that situation and say, hang on, what you're being offered by the populists is going to disappoint you, is not going to work. Here is the alternative. And so, when I was making the case for free trade here and for things like keeping the Trans-Pacific Partnership alive, you'll notice I always said, free trade means jobs. Free trade means more Australian jobs, and particularly in regional Australia. And that argument, I think we won that argument. I think people broadly accepted that. There was some pushback from the unions, but generally people could see, particularly in the regions, that, opening up all those markets particularly in Asia, was clearly going to result in, more economic activity and hence employment. And it has, by the way.
I've got a bit of a false dichotomy here, in that they're not mutually exclusive, and there's a lot more that goes into it than this. But from my perspective, I guess, or this question is sort of like, how much of politics is getting stuff done and being effective and having good ideas and seeing them through, and how much of politics is playing the game, working the room, doing the numbers, the power plays, and saying the right things to the right people at the right time?
Well, it's both, obviously. It is, because you've got to. You've got to win elections. You've got to, retain the support of a majority of your party room, and so the political machinations are important. But for me, at least, they were a means to an end. For a lot of people in politics, that's what they love. And I think I was better on policy than politics, frankly. But I think even my critics would say that. But they'd probably say it more loudly than most. But that's the one bit about being Prime Minister I absolutely do not miss, is the politics.
Yeah, it's interesting. At the end of your book, you mentioned how the most important thing in your conclusion is the importance of character.
Yeah.
Which I found really interesting, because a lot of the book, there was just so many examples of the lack of character being the quality that, led the person to double cross the person in politics to end up winning in politics. So can you, I guess, explain character and maybe distinguish what it is in the real world and the world of politics?
Well, betrayal, dishonesty, treachery, these are not just limited to politics or to spy novels. I think one of the reasons, for example, why John le Carré's Cold War espionage novels were always so attractive was that they were all about treachery, betrayal, duplicity, and people saw that in their own lives. No matter how domestic or mundane they may feel that they are. I think, however, in politics, there is not enough attention given or seriousness accorded to telling the truth. Whether it is telling the truth in the sense of being deliberate about it or being careful about getting the facts straight. So many politicians honestly don't care as long as they get the line up. And the media doesn't often hold them to account either. Very rarely. In fact, I think accountability at the moment's never been lower than it is, which is one of the reasons I think we should have a federal integrity commission. But a view I didn't always have, but if I was still PM, it would be up. It certainly would have been up and running for quite some time now. So I think that's the problem. That all too often the media, perhaps the media and the public don't care. I mean, Trump, just makes stuff up. I mean, he says whatever he comes into his mind. He's inconsistent. He's inaccurate. But his rusted-on supporters still support him. So.
Yeah. One of the books we've read in the past is called 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. Have you heard of that book?
No, I haven't actually. No.
It's a book. It's got a lot of. When I was reading the first time, it seemed like a lot of dirty tactics and all that, and I was thinking, oh yeah, that's not gonna, that's not gonna help anyone, kind of thing. But after reading your book, there was a lot of things that rhymed with some of the actions some people took, and you do speak a lot of highly good things about Scott Morrison. I'd like to add that before I say the next bit. But in reading, going back through the 48 Laws of Power, there's a few laws that he talks about, like number 14, pose as a friend, act as a spy. And I feel like that's what Morrison did, especially with leaking to the media and getting his minions to do something different. And master the art of timing. You pounce at the right time, and think as you like, but behave like others. And like he might have said to you, he's supporting the NEG, the NEG, the National Energy Guarantee.
Yeah.
But then as soon as he left, he kind of left it. So. I mean, in hindsight, it sounds like he's the master of power and a career politician. So I guess the game of politics, my question is, do you think you could have played that game in a different way? And do you think they played the game of power superior?
I'm sure there are certain junctures that I could have done things differently, and I've made plenty of mistakes. Yeah, I mean, I guess so, sure. I mean, there are a whole host of possibilities. I certainly could have done things differently, but I think I think I got the big calls right. And to be honest, I was more focused on government and delivery of reform and, the proper political outcomes, as opposed to the scheming, the political scheming. I maybe should have paid attention to that.
It's interesting. Well, I think like on paper, you're like the ultimate best person to be running a country. You've fought in some of the Australia's biggest legal cases and won. You then moved into the world of investment banking and was extremely successful in that in terms of financially and business wise. Then you're going into politics without the pressure of having to please people. You've already got your status, you've got your power, you've got your money. You don't have to do things just because somebody's saying that you have to do them. And then you've gone in there and you've been very successful in making some change. But then ultimately you're no longer Prime Minister. I guess what are some of the things that are either missing from you or missing from other people that don't make them as good a leader?
Well, look, I mean, ultimately the challenge that I had was that there was a group in the party that that were actively working to bring down the government, and had been for quite some time. I mean, there's no secret about that. That's hardly a revelation. And they had their supporters in the right-wing media. I mean, Alan Jones used to bag me every day. Sky After Dark bagged me every night.
It's unbelievable. We listened to one before this, and the facts. It's not even pulled from the book. Some of the things they come up with.
Yeah. No. They're just. But I mean, this is while I was Prime Minister, though, doing this. So, you had Abbott trying to bring Abbott, who had said, "What? No sniping, no backbiting, no leaking, whatever." After he stopped being PM, basically spent 3 years doing exactly that. and so ultimately, could I have handled that in another way? Possibly, but it is very, dealing with an internal insurgency that is as unhinged and destructive as that. I mean, you've got to remember, these guys were seeking to bring down the government in the expectation that Shorten would win, right? I mean, as Murdoch said to Kerry Stokes, we've got to get rid of Malcolm. And Stokes says, why? He's doing well. He's, only just a little bit behind Labor on the polls, published polls, but he's way ahead of Shorten. He's in a good position to win, all of which is true. To which, Murdoch says, oh, well, 3 years of Labor wouldn't be so bad. So you see, the craziness of these guys was that they wanted to bring down my government in the expectation the election would be lost so that Abbott could come back as leader of the opposition. And as Murdoch said to me, and the conversation is there, by the way, this is not contested by Murdoch, or at least I can't imagine it would be, because it was taken down in shorthand by Clive Matheson. So, or taken down in very detailed notes. So this is as it happened. Murdoch's only reservation about that was that, maybe Abbott wouldn't hold his seat, which turned out to be right. And he acknowledged that, Paul Whittaker, the most senior editorial executive of News Corp in Australia, and who is seen as being very close to Lachlan, was actively part of that agenda. I mean, how crazy is this? How crazy is it? And that's what we're dealing with. So, I think a lot of this is, there's a lot of irrational hatreds, and I think what they hated most of all about me was that I was not in their pocket. This is, rich people, particularly billionaires, like to control politicians. They like to think they own them. And they like deference and obedience. And
you'd, as we were saying, that the careerism, I mean, if your whole career and your own self-importance tied to your career in politics, then, that might be the thing that's so dear to you and you're not going to let go of, and you're happy to compromise more on values compared to yourself when you came in. But after all this, Malcolm, do you think we're in good hands now, and going forward, are things going to improve politically? Because I think both of us, man, we haven't been that interested in politics whatsoever ourselves, to be brutally honest. Our life, it's too predictable what's going on, and you just turn it off.
Well, I mean, look, how's it going? I mean, I think the governments, the Commonwealth and the states and territories, have done a pretty good job with the virus. Okay, I think that there's been some mistakes, particularly with these cruise ships, but generally, I think they've done a good job. But I regret to say, difficult though this has been, this is the easy part. Because the way to deal with the pandemic is obviously, some quarantines, lockdowns, social isolation. People have been dealing with epidemics like that for, hundreds of years, thousands of years. And so that's one degree of doing that, or other of doing that. And the countries that moved faster had the less bad experience. But the real problem is getting the economy started again, and the real problem is that a lot of the people, that so many people are unemployed, so many businesses have been severely damaged. There are many businesses that won't recover. The people that have been hit hardest are the people on low incomes and younger people. So, and there's, you can't, there's going to have to be an increase in welfare expenditure. Obviously, there already is. But, that's not the answer. You've got to get the economy moving again. What do you do with how do you get the tourism sector moving again if the borders aren't open? What do you do? What does the university sector do if foreign students are reluctant to come? What do you do with the hospitality sector? What do you do with bricks and mortar retail? It's been doing it hard for a while, but, by the time this lockdown ends, everyone will have had, will have been doing more online retailing than they've ever done before. And a lot of people who hadn't done it before will have done it and found it pretty convenient. So, even down to what I'm doing, right? So we decided to launch this book on April the 20th last year. And, a book is quite a long process, a lot of editing and typesetting and then printing. It's not, it's something that's got a lot of lead time. And we thought very carefully about delaying publication. And, but frankly, the publisher needed the cash flow, the printer had to be paid, there are a lot of booksellers that were desperate for something to sell. And I finally thought, oh, well, let's do it. And we couldn't do a book tour. So this has been an entirely virtual book tour, but sales have been good. I guess they would have been better if more bookshops had been open, obviously. But that says, so I think everyone in the publishing industry will be saying, well, maybe we should be selling books in a different way. And every industry is doing that. I can't tell you how many business meetings I've had where people are saying, gosh, this really works. Why are we getting on a plane and flying to Melbourne or Brisbane, or Singapore? Well, why aren't we just doing more of this? And so what's that going to mean for aviation? So there's a lot of, it's these sectoral impacts that I think are going to be very significant. And then the question is, where do the new jobs come from? And that's why, getting back to one of my hobby horses, you have to have a real commitment to enterprise, innovation, because honestly, people have got to come up with new ideas, new businesses to provide the opportunities of employment as the old ones, get overtaken by events.
I think it's going to be fascinating to see how everything turns out on the other side of this.
What do you guys think? Tell me what you think.
Well, I think it's obviously in the very, very short term, it's a big challenge. And then I'm sure a lot of people have been negatively affected by it. But I think over the longer term, it forces a lot of the things that were probably slowly happening. It forces that, accelerates it a lot quicker.
Yeah, well, look, let me drill into that a bit, because I agree with you. I think there are a number of existing trends that are going to accelerate, e-commerce, virtual meetings, et cetera, et cetera. That's going to have implications for commercial property, both, retail space, office space, et cetera. But what do you think are the trends that might be disrupted or diverted or reversed by this?
For me, I think it's speculative and it's an opportunity, but it's there's inevitable trend towards sustainable technologies.
Yeah.
Provided the world does enough stimulus in that area, there's a huge opportunity to accelerate that to get to zero carbon faster. And if we do, this could be a net positive.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Even though I'm told that even though the price of oil has come down significantly because of big oversupply because demand's been crushed, and that means gas is cheaper too. There is, from a consumer point of view, stronger interest than ever in electric vehicles and batteries. So is this pandemic a case of Mother Nature in the form of this virus, biology, really giving us a slap across the face? Does that remind us that the other big existential threat, which is even more severe, much more severe, of climate change, is a case of physics, giving us a slap across the face and saying, really, how many more million hectares of forest needs to be burnt before you idiot humans work out that you've got a problem?
It would be like the ultimate case of anti-fragility, and that everything's gone so crazy, and then Mother Nature's just turned around and said, let me fix this for you, just a temporary shake up, and then everyone can get back to doing things how it should be done.
Yeah, well, I hope it does. I hope we do get a new, I hope the penny does drop. But I mean, so far politically in Australia, because of this bizarre dynamic inside the coalition, I'm worried that we won't see that move.
I think for me, on a smaller scale, is just like more of on the individual level of the companies that were previously thought that FaceTime was the answer, that if people aren't in the office, they're not going to do anything. When they realize that if everyone's at home for 2 months, they actually still do work. So I think that idea, I know in your book you mentioned that in the early days of you running your own firms, you were focused on results and output, not time. And I think whilst most bosses might say that, they still think they couldn't trust people to actually work from home. But now they've been forced.
Lucy and I think largely because we were working together and we wanted to be able to spend time at home and so forth with the kids. We were actually, looking back on it, we were quite advanced in that area. I mean, I really, FaceTime at the office, I just always thought was pointless, just for the sake of being there. And, the technology wasn't nearly as good in those days. I mean,
yeah, of course.
And
there's no Zoom meetings.
When I got to Goldman Sachs, there's a couple of stories in there about that. I just could not believe the way people, particularly the young people, felt they needed to stay till 1 a.m. in the morning. This is crackers. Because I tell you a little insight there. I don't think I've got this bit in the book, but it's a true story. So I was doing a big deal in New York and I was about to close it. And I had couple of my team who, younger, more junior people, that are analysts and associates, were getting some books, some pitch books prepared, with a whole lot of numbers and so. Anyway, they turned up to this meeting, I don't know, half an hour before the meeting with the books, and I had a look at them, and the numbers were wrong. And I said, "This is terrible. What happened?" "Oh, we haven't had any sleep for 3 nights." I said, "Well." Wow. I mean, of course, if you haven't had any sleep for 3 nights, I'm amazed you can stand up. And anyway, I ended up having to sort of freelance the numbers on a whiteboard, which I'm not the world's champion of mental arithmetic, I can tell you, so that was not easy. But as a young lawyer, as a barrister, if I stood up in court at 10 o'clock and stumbled through my brief and the judge said, "Mr. Turnbull, what's wrong with you? Have you lost the plot?" And I said, "Oh, Your Honour, I didn't get any sleep last night." He'd say, "That's your problem, not mine."
Yeah.
Your client maybe ought to find someone else to represent them. So I think if you've got a clear focus on output, it's exactly equivalent in business of being focused on the customer. I mean, this is the critical thing. What are we trying to do? And then if you work out what your objective is, then the next question is, what is the most efficient way of getting there, of delivering it? But yeah, you're right. I mean, FaceTime, FaceTime as in FaceTime at the office, as opposed to FaceTime the application, I think is is going to be under a lot of pressure. I mean, if you've got a firm like I don't know, an accounting firm, a consultancy, a law firm, and you currently have 3 floors of an office building, wouldn't you be thinking now, maybe I'd be better off having one, and having, some hot desks, cubicles, whatever, because people are not going to be here all the time. And the other thing too is if this virus persists and we still remain alert to it or future pandemics, are we going to, in a risk mitigation strategy, going to be saying, well, I don't think I should have one building with 10,000 employees in it or 5,000 employees in it. I think I should have split it up, have a dozen buildings, offices, and they'd probably be half as big because people will be working remotely. So, and with ubiquitous broadband, does it really matter? I mean, if you've got, you could have on one end of an office, you can have a big screen, high definition, which shows what's happening in the office on the other side of town, or the other side of the world, even theoretically.
I like it.
It is, stuff that used to be, capabilities like this, which you needed to have not so long ago, very expensive proprietary equipment from people like Cisco, and very expensive broadband infrastructure, are now, cheap and in many cases free. So this is all what this disruption, this pandemic has caused, is all of these applications and capabilities, etc., that have been there. Suddenly people have used them to an extent they never have before. I mean, I have done more video conferencing in the last month than I have in the entirety of my life before.
Of course.
and so people will say, well,
yeah,
this is the new normal. So yeah, there's a lot of disruption.
I like it. As a complete non sequitur here, one of my favorite books I read in 2019 was Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
Oh yeah,
which was
Carr's great favorite.
Well, ultimately it was a Roman emperor, and it was his own personal diaries that was never really meant to be a book as such. At the very start of this interview, you sort of mentioned that you weren't very good at personal introspection, but really some of my favorite parts of your book was actually taken from your own diaries.
Yes.
And so obviously there's some hint of personal introspection there. Is diarising and journaling something important to you that it's obviously served
it is.
You well?
I haven't done it consistently every day of my life, but I have done it in large chunks of time. And it is a phenomenal thing to do, because you will find, or I've found, when I go back and I find diary entries from, I've got a whole set of diaries from the mid-80s, from a period of about 6 months in 80, 86, 87, that sort of period. And there's stuff in there that I have no independent recollection of at all. And yet, sometimes
Really happened. Yeah.
Memories do come back. Yeah, but it absolutely happened. Totally. Yeah, absolutely. So diaries are very valuable, and certainly very helpful writing a book like this.
Absolutely. So as we wrap it up now, moving toward the end, what's next for you, Malcolm? You still got quite a few years left in you in doing a lot for this country. You mentioned it, 47 years old, you've made your money. You don't have to go out there and just make more money. You can now focus on just helping the world in some kind of way. What's that look like now for you?
Well, I remain very committed to and interested in the whole climate change agenda. So how I will play a role in that, remains to be seen, but I'll certainly use whatever megaphone I have as a former PM to promote action in that area. I'm obviously still a Republican. I've never wavered from my republicanism, but I think there's a timing issue there we talked about. In terms of business, my keenest interest, I'm doing work with some big companies as well, but my keenest interest is honestly in innovation, Australian innovation and technology, and I've been with Luce actively investing in that area since I got out of politics, more so in the last 6 months or so. And that's there's some fantastic Australian companies. Our technology, innovation, venture capital ecosystem is at a scale it's never been before. I like to think the National Innovation and Science Agenda had a hand in that. Certainly everyone in the industry thinks it did, which is good. And that innovation agenda, while the current, government doesn't like to talk about innovation very much, it's a sort of a boo-boo word because they think it'll frighten people. It is absolutely the key. If you have got to promote innovation, technology aggressively, because that is how you are able to keep creating the new jobs that will keep you competitive. Absent that, you just run the risk of falling off the back of the pack, and that means we're less prosperous. That means the government has less revenues. That means we have less of a social welfare safety net. It means everything. It's bad for everything. So, but still, I'd rather be in Australia than anywhere else. So there's no cause for too much gloom or any gloom, really.
Fantastic. Well, we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much
thanks very much,
joining
guys.
us today.